Today we're going to take a look at the Harbor Freight tubing notcher. This is the cheapy one. Runs anywhere from $30 to $40, usually $39.95. They're always running a sale on it. You can also sometimes save another $8 if you can find that 20% off coupon. So that's a really good deal in terms of not costing you a lot of money for a tool that you may not use quite that often. Now, in no way is this to be even remotely compared to the high-end notchers, the Bailey, the JMR, the JD Squared, any of those notchers, Mittler Brothers. Forget it. They're in an entire class unto themselves. But for a guy who needs to notch some tubing from time to time, he may not want to spend upwards of $500 on a notcher. So this surely beats, we have to assume that this is surely going to beat notching by hand with a grinder and a file. So let's see what we need to do to make this thing a usable tool. For $30, we got to say we can't go wrong, but maybe we can. So we're going to take a look at it, and we're going to see exactly what the story is. Now, when you unpack this notcher, it comes like this. There's a little stop pin here. I'm going to pull that out. They do this so that they can pack it up in a smaller box. Here's your shaft. It comes out. The block that the shaft sits in has just got a little bronze bushing or brass bushing. So obviously it's not like the high-end machines that have an actual bearing in there. But for our intents and purposes, we're not going to worry about that. It's going to be fine. These are also replaceable. If you're really handy, you could actually machine yourself up a new block and put a bearing in there if you wanted. But we're going to keep this as inexpensive as possible. So we're going to work with the bearings that we have, these little bushings, and we're going to turn around and set this thing up. If you look on the back of the notcher, you'll see 3 bolts. I've loosened them, obviously, and that allows you to move the tubing holder, the little tubing vise, from what they claim 0 to 60 degrees. We'll check that out a little later, but for right now, this does give you some adjustment. Again, this here is usually packed this way when you get the tool so that it fits in everything in the box. But you just take that little collar there and move it around. So we're going to we take our shaft out and we just put it in a reverse position, and that you can actually put the lock pin back in there, which helps you when you're going to put your saw on there. Now here's the problem that we're going to have, and I'm going to show you in a minute. I'm going to put a saw on this. I've mounted a saw here, and what we've got here is a problem where the V-notch on the vise is not quite lined up. It's a little bit below the center line of the saw. That's going to give us an offset cut, which we don't want. We want the cut to be dead center. You can see here the little bit of offset. Now it's not really terrible, but we don't want to have an offset. We want to have it as straight as we possibly can. So we're going to do a little work there, and we're going to fix that. It's really pretty straightforward, not too difficult, and certainly very inexpensive. What we need to do to fix it is we have to remove this tubing vise. So we'll go and we'll take the 3 screws out of the back, and we'll proceed with our repair. So I've laid the pipe vise down on a piece of sheet metal. I've taken a Sharpie and I've drawn the outline on the metal. Make sure you locate your bolt holes as well. And then just cut it out and drill the holes. So just like in the cooking shows, I've got one that I've already done. And as you can see, it's cut out. The holes have been punched. So we place our shim on the body here. We line up our bolt holes. And then we place our pipe vise on top of that. And we'll affix that with the bolt. Now once you remount the piece, square it up with a square, just to make sure that you're 90 degrees or parallel with the frame of the piece. Now this may have been attached, the V-jaw itself of the vise may have been attached a little crooked. So you might have to elongate some of these holes to get it exactly straight. But for now, we're just going to assume that we're pretty good. I think it's a lot more clear now that the pipe vise has come more into line with the center line of the saw. On this particular unit, I was okay. I could get away with that 16 gauge piece of steel. Yours might be a little more, a little less. This one actually isn't dead on center, so I could actually shim it up maybe another 10 thousandths. Here you can see the original cut without any kind of modification. You can see it's pretty high here. Again, we're about 60 thousandths high there. So that's not really acceptable. Would it make a lot of difference? Probably not, but you know, you want to do the accurate work, the most accurate work that you're capable of doing. So if this saw is off by that much, you know, everything becomes cumulative. Errors add up, and what was, you know, 60 thousandths is now 160 thousandths. So we don't want to do that. We want to be as accurate as possible. So by making that little modification, putting that shim in there, we come up with a piece that is a lot nicer, as you can see there. Still a little high, maybe 5 or 10 thousandths high, but I'm a lot more happy with that than I am with the previous one. So that's a real quick fix, and it brings the saw more into line. The next step that we want to do, and this holds true for pretty much any of these style or any other style hole saw, is once you've got your tubing in the saddle and tightened down nice and snug, this piece, the angle vise, is tightened down snugly so you're at the angle that you want. In this case, we're at 90 degrees. You want to loosen this up and move the saw as close to the piece as possible. If you bring it out here, you wind up with a little too much flex. So you can, you know, again, these things aren't, you know, they aren't made 100% accurately. So we want to take as much monkey motion out as we possibly can. So we're going to bring the saw in as close as possible to the piece, which will reduce our amount of overhang, and then we can tighten up our block and proceed with the cut. And again, as I said, any type of tubing cutter or tubing notcher, you want to do that. You don't want to have 2 or 3 inches of overhang before it contacts the workpiece, because the shaft can flex. That's why the more expensive ones use an 1.25 inch shaft. It's a lot more rigid. But on these cheaper ones, you want to reduce the amount of motion so that you have the most rigid setup you possibly can have. I made a couple of cuts with a cheap Chinese import hole saw, and as you can see, it's toothless. So I exchanged it for a Lennox saw, and I want you to see exactly how nice the Lennox saw cuts. You don't have to spin it 1,000 RPM. Just nice like this, moderate speed, bring it in, very light pressure, let it start to cut. Just let the saw do the work. And you'll see how much nicer the cut actually is. There's a lot less burring and a lot less crap. And you don't bust your teeth up like on the cheap Chinese saws. As soon as they don't have enough flex in them, so they're very, very hard. They're very brittle. So if they catch a little hard piece, or if they catch on an edge, they just break. So invest the money, spend $9, $8, $10, whatever they're going to cost for a good Lennox saw, or again, anything bimetal, anything designed specifically for metal, and you'll have a whole lot better luck. One other point I didn't make that I really should not let go uncovered is the shaft itself. As you're using it, make sure that that's lubricated, because it will develop some heat, and that's a fast way to burn out these brass bearings, brass bushings that are in there. Some guys are actually taking this hole and tapping it and putting a Zerk fitting in there and putting a little grease in there, which also isn't a bad idea. But again, you could just grease the shaft by hand, put a little grease in there, you'll be good to go. Something just to keep the heat and the friction of this thing spinning to an absolute minimum. After a quick trip to the belt sander and a little internal deburring with a small half-round file, just to take the snot off it, this is what we're left with. And here's the piece that it goes on. And I got to tell you, you can't ask for better than that. So while I can't give it 5 stars, I mean, you know, it's a cheapy tool. It's a definite solid 3. You put a little bit of work into this thing, and you'll be able to notch tubing just as good as anybody else for a whole lot less money. And like I said, that's a solid connection there. Just trying to get it in so that you can see it. That's as good as it's going to get. I mean, you can't ask for better than that. It's even, it's flush, and there you go. $40 notcher. About an hour's worth of time to square it away, and a good saw, and you got yourself a tool that's pretty useful.